We're at the IAS. We're here with John Pottage, who's Chief Scientific and Medical Officer at ViiV Healthcare. And we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today about pediatric issues and the work that you're doing in that vein at ViiV. And then we're going to talk about cabotegravir. I think that'll be a good way to round out what's important to us anyway.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Pleasure to be here.
So what is the work that's being done right now? You're doing so much. I know it's to kind of capsulize what you're doing.
I think, do you want to just start out with cabotegravir?
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay. So cabotegravir is an integrase inhibitor that we're developing as a long-acting injectable agent for both the treatment and prevention of HIV. And so at this meeting, and actually this time period is actually an important cusp for us as we kind of transition into phase 3 of our program. And so importantly, you have to kind of keep it straight that we're doing it for both treatment, which is combined with another medicine, which is long-acting rilpivirine, and then prevention. So maybe if I could just start out talking about treatment. And we are presenting a presentation on the 48-week data of our LATTE-2 study. So we've previously presented data from this study, and it's a comparison of giving cabotegravir once every 8 weeks versus given once every 4 weeks versus an oral regimen of cabotegravir plus 2 nucleosides. So previously reported that actually the Q8 week, every 8 week, or every 4 week looked very similar, and they were actually very similar to what we see with oral therapy. And so with that data, that was the 36-week data that we saw and presented at CROI meeting in Boston, was really the first proof that we have a long-acting injectable agent working as well as the triple drug combination, which is the standard of care.
What was it that informed your decision to do 4 or 8 weeks as opposed to 8 or 12?
Yeah, so I think and this is a phase 2B study, so it is kind of a dose ranging and dose exploration type of study. But when we took the study out to 48 weeks, and again, this is an interim look, we will be looking at 96 weeks also, that'll be upcoming. But at 48 weeks, we saw actually the efficacy of the every 4 week and every 8 week when you look at it in a snapshot type of analysis, which takes into account both the virologic activity as well as people stopping or having problems with adverse events. Overall, both looked very good. So they were over 90% less than 50 copies. And that was similar to what we saw with the oral version. But when we took a closer look at it, we actually saw inside the every 8-week data a few patients, about 5%, had low levels of virologic breakthrough. And so what we saw, and these are usually what people call our blips, and so that we felt that
was it meaningful or not?
Whether it's meaningful or not in the long run, because again, if you look at the overall data, they look the same. But I think the concern is with the long-acting drug, having the right dose, having the right amount of medicine there is a great concern. And so what we felt the best way forward is to go with the shorter or the every 4-week regimen and go forward with it. Now, we're dealing with 2 drugs here, both rilpivirine and the cabotegravir, and so trying to make sure we cover patients as best we can. Now, we'll go forward into the phase 3 studies doing every 4 weeks, but we are open to perhaps studying more prolonged intervals in the future. But I think here,
do you think it's patient or host dependent, or it's?
Well, it may revolve around a little bit about patient characteristics, but I think it's more of the pharmacology, the PK, making sure we have enough drug. And so with an injectable drug, you're giving an injection. This is long acting, and this is such that you inject, it's like a depot, and it has to gradually
Leaches out,
elute.
yeah.
And so people are sometimes different, and if they're bigger or smaller, there might be variability. And so I think that might be
Dose
part of it.
milligram per kilogram of body weight or something like that?
Yeah, and so as we don't look at dosing that way. So it'll be a set dose as we go forward. But those are things to consider as we go forward. But I think from this data, it's really allowed us to go forward into the phase 3 program, which will be starting up in a few months. And so that will again be patients who are suppressed, and then they will be switched over to the 2-drug long-acting injectable regimens.
So what are your aspirations with it? No, this is just treatment we're talking
This
about.
is for treatment, and treatment of suppressed patients. So it's an option, an important option for patients who want to maybe get off the daily pills.
And there may be many of the people that this would be very important.
Well, we believe that, and I think this is the first set of medicines going in this approach, and I think obviously this is the first one, and we're interested in developing newer drugs, other drugs that may be easier to administer, maybe give subcutaneously rather than intramuscularly. And also maybe we could have longer dose intervals. So those are all things that, this is the start of a new era. And so that's the exciting part, the new innovation that we see with it.
Do you believe you have things in the pipeline now, or are you just hoping?
Well, we do have things in the pipeline looking at existing antiretroviral targets. And actually now, and something we didn't do in the past was to consider, can this be a long-acting drug? Now we do. And so every drug we have coming through the discovery group, we take a look and see if it could potentially be useful for a long-acting agent. So I think what you're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years are an array of newer drugs coming out. Now these are long-acting, small molecule specific antiretroviral agents. You'll also see the injectable broadly neutralizing antibodies coming along, and so there's a whole host of opportunities, I think, with injectable type of agents, long-acting agents, so it'll give more options for patients for treatment.
So with this drug, you wouldn't necessarily switch this right to a preventative. You would probably think in terms of less drug, or not?
Well, I think you would think of less drug for this, yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
Are you working? How are you working that out right now?
So with PrEP, we look at it as one drug being given, and we're looking at the again the pharmacology, the PK, and so we're getting ready to go forward in our phase 3 program for prevention, and it's being done in collaboration with the HBTN. And so they're getting ready to roll out that study in the next couple of months.
Would you always have to give them a lead-in with the oral age patient, regardless of whether how it's approved, whatever?
I think the desire is to not have to use oral lead-in, but because this is a new drug, and we don't. At
least for now.
For now, and so we're doing this in a safe fashion going forward, because we don't know. And so the problem is, if you give an injection, this drug can be in your body for a year. And so if you have some kind of adverse event, you can't get it out. It can't be dialyzed or taken out.
Deal with
so
the side effects.
what we like to do is to give an oral lead-in to test for the safety.
How many patients do you think would prove out that there's no anomalies out there?
Yeah, it'll be in the thousands before we do that. But and actually, the HBTN 083 study is 4,500 patients.
So that may be the answer, right?
So I think we'll get a lot of information with it, and hopefully we'll get there. It's possible we won't, but I think it is the desire to go forward with.
Well, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to have a lead-in of
a month
or so.
Yeah.
So one thing that we always admire, or at least I do, of your company is your focus and your deliberate focus at pediatric AIDS.
Right.
And like you said, you don't do move any drugs forward that don't really shine for for a pediatric formulation.
Right.
So how is that coming along for you?
Yeah.
Pediatric formulations are still extremely important, especially in Africa, because we don't have that many pediatric issues in the United States.
But we do, and I think there are a couple of points with pediatrics, and talking about younger children, but also adolescents. And I think adolescents, just to start out with them, they are a very difficult group because obviously they're adolescents going through a lot of life changes. And actually that's one area of interest for us with long-acting agents. So traditionally you sometimes see that adolescents have difficulties with adherence. And so they're missing doses, they run into resistance developing. So if we can develop a long-acting agent where they don't have to worry about taking a medicine on a daily basis, I think they're an ideal population to look at. And so they really are a group that we have great interest with in terms of developing new drugs that are long-acting. Now they are injectables, and when you go down into the younger children, that's a big shot, and maybe it's not as appropriate for them. But pediatrics is very important for us, and it really does go to the mission of the company, which we all abide by, which is to leave no patient behind. And so that includes, obviously, our youngest patients. And so and it's important at this meeting where we really hear quite a bit about children and adolescents, more so than at previous meetings I think I've been at. It really brings to attention why we need these medicines. And it's not simple to go forward with it. And what we've done at ViiV is to really start the process early. I think in previous times, I think most companies kind of concentrated on adults, got that all done, and then they turn their attention to pediatrics. We do them at the same time, so we try to do that in parallel. And we work very closely with various collaborative groups, with IMPACT, which is the NIH pediatric group, PENTA, and so which is the European group. And
now, when you say these groups, are they patient advocacy groups?
They're more of they do the drug development with us, so they're more of clinical trial groups. They do have advocacy portions to them.
Okay, because I feel like there doesn't seem to be that in the United States. I don't know that there really needs to be as much, but you know, leaving no patient behind means that there should be some advocacy somewhere.
Yeah, no, I believe there definitely is, but I think that we have our own internal advocacy for this, and it's very important to us. And I think when you think about the development programs for pediatrics, it's probably two big areas. One is developing the formulations that younger children can take, but as you go down in age, you talk about scoring pills, because you don't need as much. You develop newer formulations like new pill sizes, and so we just recently had FDA approval for the 25 and the 10 milligram tablets for children. And so if you think about a rough dosing of dolutegravir, and that's what I'm talking about here, of about 1 milligram per kilogram, we have approval down to 30 kilograms now. And so when you put that together, you could give 3 10 milligram tablets for that, so it helps with flexibility. I think as you go younger, you start to get to the need where they can't take pills, and so we get into the dispersible formulations like sprinkles, things like that. And so that we have a great number of efforts going forward to developing those. Now the second part of pediatric drug development is actually doing these clinical studies. So there's the formulation work, which is ongoing, but then studying the children. And that's not as easy as it is when you study adults. There's lots of patients, and you don't have issues of having parents having to oversee, and you're dealing with minors. And so as you go down, it gets a little bit more and more difficult to find patients for the clinical studies.
Do you get pushback on parents who do not want their children, their pediatric age children, to take treatment?
There's some, but for the most part, no. I think there's actually they've
been made to realize that this
I think
is
as the times have moved on, I think 10, 20 years ago, yeah. But now I think things are much better.
Because as long as they realize that we have for the adults the same
Right.
thing now we have for children.
We do, yeah.
When you talk about leaving no patient behind, what about the deep salvage? There's so few.
That's right.
But they're yet important.
But they're still important
They're
to
still
us.
important.
And so one of the medicines we are developing is an attachment inhibitor, and it's devoted primarily to people with limited treatment options. Now, it is in phase 3 right now. It's one of the drugs we acquired in our BMS acquisition, where we took on the pipeline from BMS. So that's coming forward, and it's being developed for advanced patients. And so I think, and that's not a hindrance to us going forward. So as drugs come through the pipeline, we look at, you look at different target profiles and where do they fit in, and developing drugs for multi-resistant viruses is one of our targets going forward for that.
It's not very many people today, but they are there.
And the potential to increase, unfortunately, but it is interesting thinking about the differences over the years, and many people at this meeting have been comparing it to the year 2000, but look at the advances made in medicines. And so the reduction in emergence of resistance with better therapy has extended people's time on that.
It came from the bar being raised every time a drug comes out.
Oh, that's true. And so it's not simple. The bar is very hard, but we feel we're up to the task to go for it. And so we, use that as words to spur us along. We can do hard things.
And you've been doing a good job. And I really appreciate you taking the time with me. I know you're very busy.
Oh, thank you. I always enjoyed talking.
But it's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Fred.